Blended Podcasts. Brought to you by Blended Audio.
Exploring the unexplained,
breaking down barriers,
putting the macabre under the microscope,
dissecting the disturbing,
seeking out the sinister,
bringing you the jinkies and the jump scares.
Hey guys, welcome back to Freaky Friday. This week we have a particularly hair-raising story to discuss with you. We'll be discussing, I think, possessions in general, but focusing on one major possession that happened to one very poor family.
I would go as far as to say it's probably the most famous and well-known possession, because it actually went on to inspire one of the first, if not the first, possession-type films, which was The Exorcist.
It's even just the true story version of it is as hectic as the Exorcist movie.
I will go as far as to say I think the original story is actually a lot scarier. The Exorcist, the film, is obviously, it was, it's a classic and it's known for its shock factor, but I found, while researching, I found the original story a lot creepier, actually.
Yeah, the story definitely stuck with me. And like you said, it's not anything new. It took place back in the 1940s.
Yeah.
So the story is actually about something that was published in the newspapers back in the 1940s about a 13-year-old boy who was supposedly possessed.
Yeah. But he went by like a couple of names.
There are a couple of names for him. I believe a book was written on it, which was what the movie was based off of. And this book, the whole family, and especially the boy that this happened to, requested that they keep his identity a secret. So they are in a multitude of pseudonyms that they're referred to him by. I know Roland is one. There's Ronald. There's Robert.
There's Robbie.
Oh yeah, there is.
Yeah.
So it's very difficult to tell which name is correct, but I think we'll just call him Ronald.
We'll probably go between them. It's going to start with an R. You'll know who we're talking about.
So the way the story begins is that Ronald was a very quiet, from what was described about him by his family and friends. He was a very quiet boy, very studious. He wasn't really outgoing.
Nothing out of the ordinary.
No, very normal boy, very normal family. And he was an only child, so he depended on the adults in his family for means of fun and entertainment.
They were like his friends, basically.
Exactly that. And I think that is what led to him and his aunt sort of bonding very closely. And his aunt Harriet was a spiritualist, from what I understand.
Really into the occult and stuff like that. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, he showed an interest in Ouija boards, and she was the one who introduced him to playing with spirit boards and communicating through them.
Exactly. And just to point out off the bat how bad an idea it is to play with Ouija boards.
That's the thing. I'm a paranormal investigator and I love investigating the paranormal, but Ouija boards and spirit boards are the one thing that I will not touch. There's just something about them that I think is crossing the line.
Agreed. I have a feeling I will not go near that stuff at all.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people, when I bring that up, argue with me that using things like spirit boxes and EVP recorders to communicate with spirits is very much the same, but I don't think so, because
I don't view it that way at all. There's something very different about inviting spirits through the Ouija board. It's essentially a board game, and sometimes the things that you invite to talk to you are not friendly, and they view that invitation as exactly that, an invitation.
Yeah, to me a Ouija board is you're opening the door and saying, come on in, let's chat.
Exactly.
With your other equipment, you're just communicating with what is already there.
I agree completely.
Which comes with its own dangers, let's be honest.
It definitely does. Anytime you deal with any of this stuff, you are stepping over a certain barrier into a different dimensional world.
Yeah.
But there's just this feeling that comes with the Ouija board for me.
I've heard too many horror stories
about
Ouija boards. But also, I think it's important to point out that the Ouija board was originally introduced as, I believe, a Hasbro children's game.
It was. That's what I said. It's a board game.
Yeah, it's that's crazy to me, is that it was It was introduced into the market for children. You know, that's insane to me.
And like you pointed out, there's so many horror stories, and this particular story revolves around exactly the consequences of him playing with this.
Well, that was the thing. Something that didn't come up in my research is that I don't know if this was a direct result of playing with the Ouija board.
From what I understand, I think it is.
Yeah, it makes sense. But let's get back to facts, though.
So what happened was Aunt Harriet and Ronald started getting into Ouija boards and playing around with it. And a few weeks later, Aunt Harriet passed away from what they classified as natural causes. But the interesting thing to note is the logic from back then to today was very different. And they would classify, it was a term that encompassed a lot.
Yeah.
You could pretty much get hit by a bus, and they would say you would die of natural causes because naturally if you get hit by a bus you die.
It was a very natural bus.
That was legitimately the logic they used.
Yeah.
So nobody knows actually what she died of, but the death affected Ronald a lot.
Yeah.
And in an attempt to contact her, he kept using the Ouija board.
Okay. I actually didn't come across that in my research. That's really interesting.
I found that a few times. So the whole thing was that he was trying to contact her, make contact with her, and he kept using the Ouija board to do that.
Yeah.
Particularly one time he was sitting with his grandmother, and they used the Ouija board to try and contact the aunt. He was never successful until I think it was a few weeks later. A wide variety of, it's not symptoms, but strange events and phenomena started coming through. So
I don't know if you're referring to the same thing here, but when I was researching, they heard a lot of like scratching on the walls.
Yes, that was it. So a lot of strange phenomena started happening after that. There was, like you said, a very unnerving scratching happening in the floorboards.
Oh, it was the floorboards, yeah.
If there was a crucifix on the wall or a painting of Christ, those started to rattle as if they were being moved from an unknown force.
Yeah.
There were apparently the walls started dripping with water out of nowhere.
I did read about that as well, and I think it's also important to point out that water is a force for spiritual activity because it's got so much energy in it and stuff like that, that spirits actually draw from water to manifest and to communicate.
So exactly, so water was found on the walls and on the pipes with no sort of explainable reason for being there.
Yeah.
And then I think eventually it escalated to where large furniture, not even small things, we're talking a bed, we're talking coffee tables, we're talking nightstands, would start to move on their own.
Oh, wow.
And one of the most distressing things was Ronald's bed, when he would lie in it, would vibrate and shake quite violently.
Yeah. Well, that's actually something, I don't know who of our listeners have watched The Exorcist, but that was one of the things, is that Reagan's bed would shake and
it's a
move
very,
violently.
very important factor that continues throughout this entire event.
Yeah.
And at first, as we all do, we try and write it off to logical things. So the scratching under the floorboards, the family assumed it was rats, and they brought in pest control, and to no avail. There was nothing they could find.
Yeah.
These weird events kept occurring and increasing. There was thumping and tapping.
I just don't understand how you would explain away furniture moving.
So what I believe is the family would put it down. And I mean, I'm guessing if you're open to your family members playing with the Ouija board, you've got a bit of an open mind to the paranormal. From what I understand, they viewed it as, maybe it was the Aunt Harriet just trying to make a bit of contact.
It's a little aggressive,
But the moment things started getting very violent and increasing in intensity, they started thinking, no, this doesn't seem right. This does not. They do not think it's the Aunt Harriet anymore.
Yeah.
What's good to note is these events would happen during the day, but they were most prominent at night.
Yeah, that was another thing I read, is that even at the height of this boy's possession, he would be completely normal during the day, and as soon as the sun went down, he'd just go crazy.
Exactly that. Oh, so these events started then, as you said, they started affecting the boy. And he started having weird outbursts of anger, would maybe get a little bit violent. And again, back anytime he would climb into his bed, things would just start going haywire.
Yeah.
So from there, I think the family began, as I said, they believed that the events happening weren't from this Aunt Harriet.
Yeah.
And I think the game-changing circumstance was one evening when the mother walked in and actually saw the bed vibrating with the boy in it, like shaking. So that was a game changer.
That'll convince you.
And the first time somebody outside of the family started witnessing these events, it was the father of one of the doctors who had, I believe he came over, and he was sitting they were all sitting around in chairs, and he explained how it went from one moment of Ronald sitting in a chair to him suddenly being thrown out of it.
What?
He landed a few feet away. And that was the first time somebody outside of the family had seen something like that, and he in particular started to suspect that there was something paranormal. And something important to note is during that time, you did not want rumors about yourself going out.
Yeah.
I don't think you ever do, but
Yeah.
it was you kept anything that was negative hush-hush because you did not want to be the lunatics in the town.
You didn't air your dirty laundry,
Exactly.
basically. Yeah.
So the family obviously would try and cover up all these weird events happening. And one night, the boy's behavior became so dramatically intense, and they noticed marks and bruises and welts forming all over his body, but there was no indication of anything physical actually happening to him.
Yeah.
Then the family began to exhaust their options. They would take him to doctors, they took him to psychiatrists, none of who could find anything. As a last resort, they turned to the church, and there they came into contact with Father Hughes, I believe. To start off with, Father Hughes gave the family some holy candles and a bottle of holy water,
Yeah.
only to be called that night by a mother in panic, saying the bottle was thrown off the shelf and smashed by some unknown force, and supposedly when they lit the candle, the flame shot up towards the ceiling.
Oh, wow. Well, I mean, that's the thing. A lot of times, these measures that you take in cases of demonic possession, if they're not...
It aggravates them.
Yeah, it aggravates them more than it helps, and it sort of just makes the activity that much more intense.
So Hughes went to go meet the boy apparently then, and he said from the moment he met the boy, he had this cold stare to him. It was like there was nothing behind the eyes. Interestingly enough, as he sat across the table from him, he'd brought some holy books with him, including the Bible, and all the boy would do was stare at those books.
Oh, wow. That's so creepy, actually.
And just from the behavior in that meeting, Father Hughes determined this boy is possessed. I believe he then went and tried to get... he went and got permission from his superiors. And actually, to note, a very good classic sign of possession is that the person afflicted by it, they become uncomfortable and unsettled with any sacred
or holy
objects. Exactly that. So, also to note, during that visit, Hughes in Latin asked the boy, "What is your name?" And that's also a thing I think they use when people believe somebody's possessed.
Yeah.
If you speak in a language that the person should not know, but they are able to respond, it's a very good sign that they are possessed by something else. So Hughes asked the name, asked the question, "What is your name?" only to receive a response from him in Latin. Meanwhile, the boy did not know Latin, saying, "I am legions."
Oh, I didn't know that. I've heard that saying before. I didn't know that it actually originated with this.
So why that was so significant was his first indication that there's more than one demon possessing this boy.
Because they did believe that there were a couple, no?
Exactly.
I can't remember the exact number, but it was 10 or...
Exactly.
Yeah. Yes, of course.
So he took the gravity of that situation, spoke to his superiors, and asked to perform the ritual of exorcism.
Yeah.
Hughes had never done exorcism before, so he had to go and study all the prayers. I think there's a certain methodology, even if each person who does it has their own slight modifications. There's a certain formula to follow.
Yeah. Wait, can I just go back for a second with knowing that there were 10 entities, or believing that there were 10 entities within this young kid? There was also a thing where one of his scratches was an X or something?
I believe that was a bit later on, but you're right. So with all the scratches that were forming on his body, sometimes they were words, sometimes they were symbols, and one of them formed the letter X.
Which they believed meant 10.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which is the indication that there are 10 demonic entities in the poor boy.
Yeah.
They moved the boy to a hospital, and that's where Hughes tried to perform the exorcism one night. As he chanted the prayers, the boy grew increasingly violent. He started shouting and screaming, talking in a guttural voice, and it escalated to a point where it was so intense, and as Hughes was reciting the different prayers, the boy, to note, he was strapped down to his bed because it had escalated to a point where he would become so, what's the word I'm looking for, so uncontrollable at night.
Like physically violent.
Exactly.
Almost,
They had to strap him down. And he managed to break one of his hand restraints, reach under the bed, break a spring off of the mattress, and he used that as a makeshift weapon, where he sliced the father's arm from his wrist up to the nook of his elbow.
Wow.
And it was such a hectic wound that they had to cut the ritual right there.
Cut it short.
Exactly.
Yeah. That was something that stood out to me, is because in a lot of the articles that I read, a lot of people are skeptical about the exorcism. Let's just put that out there. Or about the possession in general, saying that, he was either mentally unstable or he was looking for attention. But to me, it's got to take a lot of strength to break off a bed spring, no?
Well, that was what a few priests commented. They said the force that he fought them with was not that of a 13-year-old boy. He was actually hurting full-grown large men.
That's crazy to me.
So I believe after that, Hughes had to take some time away, and the boy was taken back home, where things just continued to escalate and increase. And the moment it got to night, he would become guttural, he'd become violent, and welts and scratches would continue to appear all over his body, until one day, one of the scratches that appeared was the word Louis, which his mom took as a sign that she needed to take him to St. Louis, where they had relatives, to try and help cure him.
Yeah.
So the family moved to St. Louis and moved in with their family members there. I believe one of their cousins was studying at a university there, and he put them into contact with Reverend Walter Halloran.
Yes.
And Reverend William Bowden.
Yeah.
And Father Bowden, also upon meeting the boy, decided it could see straight off he's possessed, and decided it is time for they need to perform an exorcism.
Another one.
Having heard of the results of the last one that they tried to perform, he took this really seriously. He, I think, brought in 5 other priests to help him. A few of them just their main purpose to hold the boy down. It took 4 men to hold down one boy.
Wow.
Funny enough, the details of the exorcism that went on for, I think, 6 weeks.
Oh,
every detail was recorded by the priests in a diary. And so what happened was the men all gathered at the residence one night, and it was a calm, normal day. The moment the boy went to bed at night, he climbed in, things absolutely went chaotic. Started screaming. He would shout obscenities at the priest. I think there was a quote you.
Yeah. We were quoting the lines from The Exorcist before this, a bit explicit, so we won't repeat them.
The priest also saw so many bizarre things happen around all of this, things they could never explain, things like objects flying, the bed shaking. And what's interesting is a total of 26 people, I believe most of them priests, all witnessed these things.
Yeah.
So you have a lot of evidence right there.
But there was also something, I can't remember the exact quote, but I know that from what I read, that the kid at one point said something like, Satan is here, or...
Yes, he did. So during one of these nights, during this second attempt at an exorcism, he did shout something out like, Satan is residing in him.
Yeah.
I believe during one of the days when he was more conscious and lucid, he explained to Father Bowden that he kept having this vision that he's fighting this big red demon that's very slimy.
Ew.
And it's attempting to stop him from climbing out of this fiery pit.
Wow.
So for 3 weeks straight, they attempted reciting the exorcism prayers each night, and nothing happened. And it got to a stage where the priests were starting to feel very doubtful. They weren't sure if they were going to actually be able to help this boy. Things were just getting worse each night. It got to points where what he was shouting and screaming so much that the priest decided they needed to take him to and put him into a hospital that was run by Catholic monks, I believe, just to give the family peace. Because can you imagine the family sitting downstairs hearing this screaming, this demonic sounds coming out of what is their son?
Well, that's the thing. You focus on the person that's possessed and what they must be going through, but imagine it's taking something like 6 weeks. Imagine the toll it's taking on the family at the same time.
Exactly. And at the same time, the toll it took on the priests, and especially Father Bowden, who was heading the whole thing. He had to still work his normal job during the day.
Yeah.
This was what he was doing after hours and sometimes through to early hours in the morning. So he began to take a toll and a knock on it all. He wasn't sleeping much. He was stressed out.
No, I understand.
So it reached this point where everyone was becoming a bit desperate. I believe some nights his screaming would get so bad and the obscenities he was shouting that the priest would put a pillow over his head, obviously not to suffocate him, but it got so bad. And I mean, can you imagine how unpleasant that is every night to have a kid shouting such horrible things at you and going through that night after night after night for 6 weeks?
And you must get to a point where it almost feels hopeless, because I mean, if the exorcisms aren't working, what else is there to do, really?
Exactly. So it escalated to one very bad night where the boy broke one of the priest's noses.
Oh, wow.
And also urinated all over the bed. And the priest decided they needed to up the treatment, and their plan was to baptize the boy. They thought this would help strengthen the resistance through sacraments. And they believed that once he was anointed and converted as a Catholic, he would be subject more so to all their spiritual power and the spiritual power of the Catholic Church. And so they went forward with this plan. That night that they tried to anoint him and offered him the communion wafer, he put up the fight of his life. He fought teeth and nails. I believe that was like one of the worst nights. And finally, apparently the boy accepted the wafer, but devastatingly it did nothing. Like, it did not have any effect. And then out of nowhere, days later, there was a sudden, what they call a miracle, where suddenly there are different accounts of this, and so many that it's difficult to point out which one's true. In one version, the boy suddenly just spoke in his normal voice, which he hadn't for days. He came through and said he's gone.
Yeah, that's the account that I came across the most, is that he just said he's gone.
While in another, the boy cried out that sort of in a voice, his own voice, but speaking as if he was somebody else. He said, "Lucifer, I am Saint Michael. Leave this boy alone."
Well, I did also read a story about afterwards the young boy saying that he'd had this vision of Michael on the battlefield battling
Exactly.
Lucifer.
And Saint Michael was actually the archangel that banished
Lucifer from heaven.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So whatever it was that helped boy, that was the final, thank goodness, end to that tragic tale. And I believe he's completely normal now ever since then.
Yeah, living a normal life. They don't, I believe one person knows his real name and who he was, but will not reveal who he was.
No, shame. I think they've been through enough.
Yeah, and there's a lot of skepticism about the story. I think there's a lot of skepticism about possession in general, but, I think you know, I don't think a 14-year-old boy would keep up an act that long.
Or be able to achieve some of those feats. And as I pointed out, 26 different people witnessing things like flying objects and shaking beds. And I think it's just an overwhelming amount of evidence in front of you.
I don't think you can blame that on mental illness or on a child looking for attention. It's too bizarre, it's too intense.
But yeah, that poor boy went through the weeks, months-long battle with so many different people helping him. I'm just glad they were, I guess, able to finally break through. And well done to the people who kept the motivation to keep on fighting.
Well, like I said, I mean, you get to a point where there's nothing else you can do. So I'm glad it did work, and he went on to lead a happy life.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's all the time we have for this episode, and I hope you guys enjoyed that. I know for me, researching it, being a fan of the original Exorcist film, this was really informative and really a really nice comparison to the film and media that's come out because of it.
In fact, we had to brush over so much. There were so many details in it.
Yeah, I would recommend going and researching it yourself because there's so much to go through.
Definitely.
But yeah, thank you for joining us.
And join us next week. We will be talking about sleep paralysis, which I hope none of you have experienced. But if you have, tune in for that.
Yeah, lots of scary things to cover there. See you guys. Freaky Fridays, hosted by Devin Beatty
and Megan Portnoy, and produced with the generous assistance of Janu Blau
and Blended Podcasts.
Brought to you by Blended Audio.